Benny Morris, my main question right now for Benjamin Netanyahu, I put it to him on X directly. And I said, if you're doing everything by the book and everything is justified and everything is legal and you're not committing any war crimes or any of these things, I simply asked him one simple question. If you're doing nothing wrong, let international journalists go in and see for themselves. And I think it is completely shameful that the Israeli government continues to stop international journalists from doing their job. And it's down to the individual risk assessment will be by the journalists and their companies. You know, it was put to me on 2-3 days ago by an IDF member that somehow this has been done for the safety of the journalists. It's not. It's complete nonsense. And that's not down to the Israeli government anyway to make that call. I mean, do you at least accept that it is wrong that journalists are not allowed in there?
I completely agree with you, Piers. The government has made a terrible mistake in not allowing journalists in, and whoever dies there dies, but they should have allowed them in. But I would like to make a comment about what your previous guest was saying. He said he spoke about objectivity or something. The man is a total Hamas propagandist. Half the things he said were outright lies. Lots of doctors have been abducted and have disappeared is total nonsense. I know of 1 or 2 cases of doctors who were taken to an Israeli detention center. What happened to them afterwards, I don't know. I don't think they've been killed. I think they're under arrest for whatever reason. But
so they could have been abducted.
Many doctors have been...
You're basically agreeing with him, aren't you?
No, I'm not. I'm saying that he talked about
many doctors. You just said you know of some doctors who were detained. You have no idea what happened to them.
I know of 1 or 2 doctors.
You're confirming his story.
No, I'm not. I'm confirming a small part of what is true. The rest is a lie, as is a large part of what he's saying. Had Israel wanted to kill all the Palestinians, that's what genocide actually means, there would have been many, many, many more deaths in Gaza. Each time Israel launches an air raid, we hear of the Palestinians saying 24 people have died, 30 people have died, and I'm sure many of them are civilians, but I'm also sure that the Air Force going in against these targets is attacking Hamasniks. We never hear from the Hamas how many of their people are being killed in these strikes. All we hear about and all we see on television is dead babies and dead women. They never show grown male, army-aged males being taken out of these ruins. And the Hamas uses these things systematically, the schools, the hospitals, various so-called safe compounds to hide in.
But out of interest, all right, but Benny Morris, when you hear someone like Smodrich last week talking about the campaign to just clear everybody out.
He's disgusting. You don't have to convince me. He's disgusting.
Right, but so my question for you, but my question for you though is this. All right, he's disgusting. What he said was disgusting.
Yes.
But what he said was also genocidal. Whereas you do not believe it's genocide that's going on, he clearly is talking in a way which made me believe that actually maybe the intention is genocide. It may not be the death of absolutely everybody, but it means killing a lot of Palestinians and kicking the rest out of the area. And that is a genocide.
No. A genocide is something which is top-down government policy and carried out systematically. That's not what is happening. He is definitely, some of his speeches are genocidal. I don't know what he means exactly. And there are other ministers who speak like him, and they shouldn't be doing that. And they may even have a genocidal mentality, but they do not control government policy, and they do not control what the army is doing. That's done by the generals, and unfortunately, in my mind, by a man called Netanyahu, who's totally corrupt and incompetent.
Yeah, okay, we bring in Norman Finkelstein.
It's got nothing to do with, but it's got nothing to do with genocide.
Well, I think you're getting perilously close to agreeing with me. Norman Finkelstein, I mean, the bottom line is, if it sounds from the rhetoric like a genocide, if the actions on the ground are becoming increasingly genocidal, if there's no other plan being put out there for what happens to Palestinian people other than many more will die and the rest will be thrown out of Gaza, I don't know what else you end up calling this. And, you know, I listened to that doctor. I didn't hear somebody that I felt was a Hamas sympathizer or propagandist. He went out of his way to say he wasn't.
He's just a liar. He's a liar.
Well, he's a liar who's lost 78
Just a
members of
liar.
his family. So, I mean,
Maybe,
Norman Finkelstein.
maybe it's true, and I agree, and I feel sorry for him, but they're caught up in the bad situation where Hamas controls the population and is willing to sacrifice as many civilians as they can to win world support.
Well, which is exactly what Israel's also seems like they're prepared to sacrifice. Norman Finkelstein.
Well, thank you for having me on the program, and I hope that you'll hear me out. Is it a genocide? Well, as you know, Piers, from the first time I appeared on your program many months ago, I said it was a genocide. I said it was perfectly obvious when October 9th, the then Defense Minister Gallant said, we're not going to allow in any food, fuel, water, or electricity. Well, for a hermetically sealed population, that's a genocide. When the head of state, Mr. Netanyahu, compared the current situation with Amalek and invoked the biblical reference, it was clear, as the Israeli human rights organization B'Tselem put it, that he was talking about genocide. Now, in the 19 months that have elapsed, there have been adjustments in Israeli policy due to external pressure. That's called politics. So when the external pressures escalated, they had to diminish the genocide. And then beginning roughly when Kamala Harris was nominated for president in the United States, and all the cameras switched to the American election, Mr. Netanyahu, who's very sensitive to and knowledgeable of the American media, he then escalated the genocidal assault on Gaza again. And then, as you remember, because I did several programs with you at that time, as you'll remember, every day there was another massacre. There were so many massacres it was impossible to keep count, and it was impossible to remember. Now again, there was some lessening.
The first massacre, which was launched by Hamas.
Okay. I've not forgotten it, Benny. But you have to remember manners. I'll remember the massacres, and you remember manners. I'm speaking now. So, there were times when Israel, as I said, escalated the genocide and then diminished the genocide. Now, let's talk about the responsibility and the mindset. You've mentioned Mr. Smotrich. I mentioned Mr. Netanyahu. There was also several others whose names have constantly come up. Obviously, Defense Minister Gallant, who was indicted along with Prime Minister Netanyahu by the International Criminal Court. But it's not just the leadership. It's not just the leadership. The most recent poll showed that fully 1/2 of Israeli Jews, we're talking now about the population, fully 1/2 of Israeli Jews believe that Israel should conduct a genocide in Gaza. That's what the poll result showed. 82%.
That's a lie. That is a lie.
I know, Benny, everybody's lying.
There's
but
never been a
finish.
poll about supporting
Please,
genocide. This is nonsense. You're purveying lies.
Okay. Okay, Benny.
What is that poll, Norman? What is that poll? What is that poll, Norman? It seems a very important poll. What is that poll you're referring to?
It was a university, if my memory is correct, it was a University of Pennsylvania poll. It was reported everywhere. Benny Morris knows about the poll. He's fully informed of the poll, but he's doing his job as an official Israeli propagandist.
I have no job. I don't like this government.
Benny,
I'm not their spokesman.
You've reduced yourself. Mr. Benny, you've reduced yourself to the level of a Holocaust denier. It's a real shame that you have sunk so low, but allow me to continue. The poll showed that 82% of Israeli Jews, 82% support a forced expulsion from Gaza.
That's not the same as genocide.
Population.
That may be true. That may be true, but that's not genocide. That's not genocide. What you said before about genocide is total nonsense. Total
Okay.
nonsense.
Piers, you're going to have to ask Benny Morris to please allow me to speak.
Well, Benny, I will let
You're
you
taking
respond
up
to
all
this.
the time, though.
Yeah,
But
Norman, you must give
Finkelstein
him
is
a
getting
chance
all
to
the
respond.
time.
Though.
Okay, I will finish. I will finish. Then one of the leaders of the opposition in Israel described Israeli soldiers as killing children as a hobby in Gaza. Now, yes, he took it back. He took it back after he came under ferocious attack. But he himself acknowledged, when I debated Mr. Morris about a year ago, and I said that Israel targets children, he laughed. He thought it was such a funny remark by me.
It's absolute
I'm wondering, after the foreign doctors in Gaza, after the foreign doctors in Gaza attested that the children were being shot in the head and the chest, and when one of the leaders of the opposition in Israel said that the Israeli soldiers kill children as a hobby.
I must let Benny respond, Norman. I must let Benny respond. Benny.
There has never been a poll asking Israelis whether they support genocide. This is a total lie, and the 50% figure is also something completely out of Norman Finkelstein's imagination, his twisted mind, actually. There is no targeting of children deliberately, and what this politician said, and he's actually a very clever politician and usually tells things straight and the truth, was a slip of the tongue, and he said, I made a mistake. I said the wrong thing, and I shouldn't have used that phrase, stupid phrase. Israeli soldiers do not target, as a rule, children. There may be, and I'm sure there are and have been, war crimes committed by Israeli soldiers and pilots, perhaps, in this war in the course of 19 months. But I don't think we should forget that Hamas is a homicidal, a homophobic, misogynist, totalitarian organization which tried to kill as many Israelis as they could, most of them civilians, on the 7th of August. And what befell Gaza as a result is revenge for that attack by the Hamas. And the Hamas said they would do the same thing again if they are revived and resuscitated as a leading organization in the Gaza Strip. And I think that's the objective of the Israeli army, to end Hamas rule and to end the Hamas as an organization in the Gaza Strip. And anybody normal who doesn't support Islamists, doesn't support anti-Semitism, doesn't support misogyny, doesn't support homophobia, should be against Hamas, which Norman Finkelstein apparently isn't.
Yeah, but I don't hear people supporting Hamas certainly in mainstream media or anywhere else. Everyone's of a unanimity that what they did was unconscionable and they should be held to account. The problem is that the strategy that the Israeli government is... Yes, I heard.
They still want to do and say they
Benny,
want to do.
Benny, let's just assume, because they said it themselves, in fact, the spokesman said it after October the 7th, that if they can do it again and again, they will. So they want to get rid of all the Jews in Israel. Okay, that is Hamas.
And of the state of Israel. And of the state of Israel.
But the problem is, as I've always said from the start of this, what is a proportional response to what happened? And what is the end game? What does Israel actually want at the end of this? And I'm beginning to think they don't have any plan at all. That actually what they're hoping is that they can pursue the line of many of the more right-wing members of that cabinet. Maybe Netanyahu himself now has been introduced into this because he has no incentive to end the war, because the moment it ends, he'll be held accountable for allowing October the 7th to happen in the first place, which was hugely unpopular for him and the polls with the Israeli people. But secondly, he's facing corruption charges in a criminal court the moment this is all over. There is no incentive for him to end it. And so this carries on and on with more and more Palestinians being killed. And all right, you might have a belief that the IDF never deliberately target children, but they are deliberately and relentlessly targeting civilian areas, in their estimation, going after Hamas. But in the process, they know they are going to kill on a daily basis dozens, if not hundreds, of innocent people as well. And that's been going on now week after week, month after month. And at some point, you surely have to concede that this strategy is not working. It's making Israel global pariahs. It's making Israel global pariahs. There is no evidence that Hamas is being dismantled. In fact, the opposite appears to be happening, where for every Hamas terrorist killed, they're apparently replacing them with multiple more people who share that ideology. The hostages are not being released. God knows how many of those hostages may be killed now with these intensifying airstrikes.
No.
Israel now says it's launching.
Can I correct you?
Israel now said, well, let me finish.
About the
Israel now says it's launching a massive new attack. Well, okay, bully for Israel, but actually none of this seems to be working. And so at some point,
can I correct you?
Say enough. Yes, correct me.
Okay, I understood that. Can I correct you on one small point? The Hamas kidnapped 251 hostages, most of them Israelis, some of them Nepalese, some of them Thai, on the 7th of October 2023. Of those, 177 were actually released as a result of the Israeli counteroffensive in interim arrangements.
Well, they were released by diplomacy, actually. They were released through diplomacy.
But the Israeli military pressure is what persuaded the Hamas, because they also
So why is it not working now?
Why
isn't it working now?
It will work. I don't know. Firstly, there's only 20 alive Israeli hostages left in Hamas hands. I do believe that the government was incompetent in.
We don't know that. We know there are over 50 are not accounted for.
No, we know there's 20 live ones and assumed 38 dead ones. That's what Israeli
but nobody knows for sure.
knows. Okay, nobody knows for sure. The government now, which was incompetent and I think incompetently managed this war, that's why it stretched out for so long. Though don't forget, we also had a war with Iran and with Hezbollah, and we continue to have a war with the Houthis from Yemen. So it's not just been Israel focusing only on Gaza. But
but in the war, if I may say, before I go back to Norman, with the war with Hezbollah, that was a scenario where Israel, in terms of military operation, brilliantly targeted 3,000 Hezbollah terrorists in a way that begs the question, why could they not have done a similar operation on Hamas? And I've heard all the excuses and explanations and arguments, but in one case, Israel has now, since October the 7th, 2023, just launched endless strikes and assaults on civilian populations in Gaza, killing, we don't know how many, but we know it's many tens of thousands, including over 20,000 children in a population with 50% under 18. And in their offensive against Hezbollah, which was incredibly successful, they targeted 3,000 terrorists with pages, which have got explosives in. There's a massive difference in the way that Israel's gone about these two counter-terrorist operations, as they would put it. And I would argue the way they went after Hezbollah had global support in a way that the way they've gone after Hamas in Gaza is increasingly making Israel a global pariah. Norman, your response.
I agree with you completely, but there were two reasons for that. The first one is that the Hamas has systematically hidden behind civilians and in tunnels underneath civilian centers.
Are we having
a
Norman monologue?
Norman.
With all due respect to you, Piers, I think there's a misunderstanding about what's been happening since October 7th. Once October 7th happened, it was a crisis for Israel. About that, there's no dispute. But it was also viewed, as the cliche had it, it was also an opportunity. And the opportunity was to once and for all solve the Gaza question. Now, from day one, it was perfectly obvious that the goal of Israel was to solve the Gaza question through three methods. One, ethnic cleansing. Two, make Gaza unlivable. And three, mass killing, mass death and destruction. Now, if you look at it from that vantage point, the operation has been hugely successful. I don't know why, with all due regard, and I do respect you, I don't know why you keep saying it's been unsuccessful. They've destroyed about 90% of the housing in Gaza. They've destroyed about half the hospitals in Gaza. They have destroyed about half the universities in Gaza. They have destroyed about half the arable land in Gaza. Gaza won't be habitable anytime in the next 2 decades, according to the best estimations by the international community, international organizations, the World Bank, the and International Monetary Fund, UNCTAD, and so forth. It's been hugely successful. Where we're at now is the final phase. And the final phase is why all the rats, like the leadership in the UK right now, and the French and the Canadians, they're trying to jump off the sinking ship because they know exactly what Israel has in mind. We're now at the apocalypse, the final phase. Mr. Morris has written a lot about 1948 in Israel. And in fact, what's happening now is very similar to what happened in October 1948. If you read his books, which I have, you see a massive escalation of atrocities during the 1948 war as they're trying to finish the job. And now Israel is trying to finish the job. If you read your own Financial Times, it described very beautifully what this Gaza Humanitarian Foundation was about. They were going to set up 2 or 3 distribution points in the south of Gaza. And then everybody from the north and the middle of Gaza would have to go to the south in order to get food or water or medicine. And then when everybody was congregated in the south, what do you think is going to happen? Exactly what happened in October 1948. There were going to be the massacres. You know what they were going to say.
Can I say something?
There was rioting. There was rioting at the food distribution centers. The IDF felt afraid. And then it started to fire. And then they hoped
Piers,
in
can I
one
say
fell
something?
swoop they could
Yeah,
send
Norman,
the
you must-
whole population over the border into Egypt.
He likes to lecture.
It's perfectly
He always likes to
obvious
lecture.
what Israel is doing now. It's the last stage, or I should say, it's the final stage of the final solution. And now some of the Western leaders don't want to have to dirty their hands with it. So suddenly people like Lamy are discovering that it's intolerable, the situation in Gaza. Guess what?
Can I
It's
say
been
something?
intolerable since October 8th.
Okay, final word, very briefly, to you, Benny.
As far as I've understood, that firstly, at the moment, there's discussions of a prisoner exchange and a ceasefire between Israel and the Hamas, which may work out and give the Hamas a breathing space of 60 days at least in which to reorganize and whatever. But the Israeli military plan, as far as it's been published, is to take over essentially 75% and maybe by the end 100% of the Gaza Strip and root out the Hamas, kill the Hamas people or get them to surrender and leave the territory, and to supply the Palestinian population in 3 centers, not just in the south, but also in the north, with humanitarian aid, if the Hamas will allow it to come through, because the Hamas have been taking most of the humanitarian
lying,
aid
Benny.
and then,
Benny,
selling it to merchants, and then selling it to merchants and making money with which they can hire new fighters. That's what the Hamas has been doing with the humanitarian aid.
Okay, Benny, the truth is, when you launch a 3-month blockade of aid going in, when you know kids are starving, it's unconscionable. I don't care what you try and dress it.
That's incorrect. There was a lot of food stores there for this period. Now they're reaching a stage at which there is famine, and Israel has begun.
All right, I'm going to leave it there. I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Norman. We've run out of time.
The whole world is lying. The whole world is lying. The World Food Program
except Norman
is lying.
Finkelstein. Except for Norman Finkelstein. Everybody's lying.
UNICEF is lying. The whole world, which says there's a massive starvation verging on famine in Gaza, it's all made up.
Well, one thing, listen, you don't have to be an expert. You don't have to be, Norman, you don't have to be. You don't have to be an expert to know if you stop food going in sufficient quantities to a population population that's already been at war since October 2023, and that many of them are young kids. They're going to start starving to death, and they will. Anyway, I'm going to leave it there. Thank you both for a spirited debate.
If the food doesn't arrive.
Yeah, well, the food hasn't been arriving because there's been a blockade. We've got to leave it there. Thank you very much.
No, it started again now arriving.
Well, that's very generous of Israel, isn't it? After 3 months of starving people.
It's not
thank
a
you
matter
all
of
very
generosity.
much.
There's also international pressure.
Yeah,
3
sure.
months
Well, the pressure's
of starving 1
right,
million children.
Got to leave it there.
3 months of starving 1 million children.
Got to leave it there. It's unconscionable, like I said. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it.